There are rulers in the cornfields, prophets in the mines, kings sleeping in the classrooms, saviors paying for our crimes. But when we finally get to heaven and our loved ones all gather round, we will know our true home at long last in that bright city in the clouds. They are gone and we will never see them again with earthly eyes of brown or blue, and our golden things we gather round us only stand in place for what's true. But when we finally get to heaven and our loved ones all gather round, we will know true home at long last in that bright city in the clouds. Yes, when we finally get to heaven and our hearts are safe at last, we will know the reason for all these sufferings, no longer seeing darkly through the glass. And when we finally get to heaven and our loved ones gather round, we will know our true home at long last in that bright city in the clouds, in that bright city in the clouds.
My name is Roger Hamlett. I'm Conn Hamlett's youngest son. And I want to thank everybody for attending today's service. My father would be honored and humbled to see all of you here. On October the 12th, my dad had a stroke, and everything changed after that point. Some of you that are familiar with strokes and things like that, you know what's to come, and those that you have not, then I can tell you this: it affects everybody in the family. It changes everything. But I can tell you one thing that certainly helps. That's when the calls, the text, the cards, money, hugs, the post you've put online, the visits, and the prayers. That's what pulls you through this. So thank you to all of you that did that, and that's how we've gotten to this point. There's two public thank yous that I need to do that have to be done. One is Russ Corley, the former minister here at Madison, has been the support and comfort that he gave us through this time period has been unbelievable. Russ pulled us through. So thank you, Russ. And secondly is my mother. My mom was married to my dad for 58 years. They were together for 62 years. And when Dad finally got to go home, which is what he longed for, my mother basically just ran home care for the last 6 weeks around the clock. It's just amazing that she's even here today. I know that she's exhausted. I'm an eyewitness to that. We're going to have some speakers today. Josh Hamlett, not yet, sorry. Joshua Hamlett is going to speak. He's Conn's grandson. He's his only grandson. And then we're going to have a song. And then Marty Rothschild, who is a dear friend of my father's. They're both members of this church together. They both serve on Good Pastors Board. And my father taught his daughter. So we're going to have some words from Marty from that perspective. And then John Shoulders, 1982 graduate of Good Pastor, who is currently the president at Friendship Christian, is going to get up and say some words about Dad. And he's a remarkable guy. He reminds me a lot of Dad in a lot of ways with the energy and all the things that he has done in his life. It reminds me a lot of my own father. Side note there, John married Erica and I, and he also baptized me. So that's a very important part of the Hamlett family, John Shoulders is. And then last, we're going to finish with Greg Huffines. He's going to close for us. Greg is a 96 graduate of Good Pastor. He traveled with Dad to Kennett in Europe, and his nickname was the Gregster. And when he would come visit Dad over at the hospital, when he'd walk in the room, Dad would look at the nurses and say, "That guy's got money and power." It was funny. Dad had that humor, as I found out today talking to all of you. I'm almost convinced I could take this microphone off and just pass it around the room, and you would probably just hear story after story after story. Probably better the job than what I'm doing right now. This has been tough to get through this, but I'm doing this for my dad. The last conversation I had with my father, and I wanted to say this, it's very important to me because it needs to be said right here in front of this microphone on this stage. I had the unfortunate pleasure to tell my father at the end, we were at the end. I'd met with the doctors. We got called down there that night at 3 o'clock in the morning. Dad was going down. And when we walked in the room, he just looked at me and said, "Hey, Raj, how's it going? Hey, Byron. Hey, Erica." And I was looking around, the nurses going, "What's going on? I thought y'all said, this is it." And they're like, "Well, we've never seen this before. He had hardly a pulse and his blood pressure, but he's come back." They had hit him with a drug that only lasted for about 30 minutes because they were trying to get him up. But what a blessing that was, because in that little window, my father was as clear as he's been the entire 17 and a half weeks, and that's what this was. And he couldn't have been more clear when I told him how fatal this was. He said, "Roger, no more surgeries, no more procedures. 81 is old enough to live like this." As I got emotional, as you can imagine, he looked at me and he comforted me with these words. He said, "Roger, God is real. I will live again. I am not afraid to die. It's just my time to go." And then he was happy. He's the happiest I have seen him the entire 17 and a half weeks. My brother and my wife witnessed that. And I'm glad that I did. As painful as this has been, and if I could do it any other way, I would do it. But what I realized is that may be the final lesson that I needed as a son watching my father pass. I needed to see his faith that strong. I needed to see him at the end never waver, not once. My father lost his dad, his grandparents, but one, and his beloved Uncle Lloyd, who he considered a second dad. All my life I've heard about Uncle Lloyd, but all of these people died before I was even born. So it made me realize that my dad had experienced loss. He knew that life was temporary. He knew that it was temporary and short. So when you know that, the most important thing is your faith. It's all you got. I saw my dad, who was so prideful, so handsome, the voice, the talent, the power, everything taken away from him. He couldn't eat. He couldn't talk. He couldn't walk. I saw him lose all kinds of weight, and that was hard on him. But let me tell you what I never saw. I never saw him cry. I never saw him frightened. And I never, ever saw him lose his faith. But also, you know Dad, too, he never lost that sense of humor either. He kept asking us, even though that was my last conversation, that wasn't the last thing that he said. He would wake up from time to time and say, "Is it still January?" I found out my father had a disdain for January. During that ice storm a couple weeks back, I asked my father, "In your 81 years, have you ever missed a January?" He said, "Not one." I think he was trying to make it to February, and he almost did it. But he died on a Sunday, and I think that's kind of appropriate, the deep faith that he had. And that's why tomorrow we're taking him home, and we're going to bury him on Sunday. Now, there's one more thing he said as a joke that's pretty good. When we said our last things and we sat down, some chairs around the bed, he said, "Now, I don't want to hurt y'all's feelings, but I'm gonna go just rest now." And we sit there and sit there. The nurses came in. They unplugged some things. He was starting to get really sad. And then he woke back up. And the nurse looked at him, and she could tell she was startled. So she didn't know what to say other than, hey, Mr. Hamlett, can I get you something to drink?" And he said, "Drink?" Because he'd been denied drinking anything the entire stay. And she said, "Sure." And he looked over at us and said, "Man, they must think I'm dying." After talking to all of you today and going through this, it's so obvious Dad invested in us. He knew, like I said a while ago, he knew what was important. He knew this was temporary. He knew this was short. So what is the most important thing to do is start investing in that life. I saw it. I needed to see it. This May, I'm going to be celebrating 25 years with my wife, our anniversary. John Shoulders married us. My dad was the best man in my wedding. He's still the best man I know today. Thank you, Dad. Thank you for everything. Josh.
Hey, I am Pops' only grandson, Josh. I could see how many lives my granddad had touched by how many of you are here celebrating his life today. I just want to say thank you for being here. Appreciate it. He was just such an amazing teacher, preacher, speaker, and radio personality that he had. And he was even a bodybuilder and professional wrestler in the early days to help support his family. And he was also an author known for his Western novel series about John Lee Johnson. I know he was all of those things and more, but I know him best as to being my grandfather. One of my earliest childhood memories of him was when my family would all eat together every week for Sunday dinner. We would always eat at their house back in the days, and I remember when they used to have this Mitsubishi rear projection TV in the living room, and Pops would just love to watch SEC football in old Western movies. And he was so interesting to talk with and knew more trivia than anybody out there that I know. And Pops liked to joke around even when we were little kids. One time around Christmas, all of us were at their house celebrating. I was younger and still learning how to talk at the time, and he pointed to this very large belly-looking Santa Claus doll hanging by the door or something like that, and told me, "Look at Santa, Josh. Santa is slim." Can you say Santa is slim? I pondered on what Pops said, and knowing he was a very knowledgeable grandpa, thought, well, he must be correct. I looked at the Santa doll that was like hanging on the door, and then like looked back at him, and I also noticed that at that time in Pop's life, he was shaped a bit like Santa. Yeah, I know, and replied back saying, okay, Santa is slim, and you must be slim too. We all had a big laugh, perhaps. I take a little bit of my personality from him as well, and I just loved going to Kennett in Bragg City, Missouri, where Pops' family was from, and me, my mom, dad, and my sister used to enjoy going there a lot all together to visit my great-grandmother and many other relatives. And sometimes on our drive back home, we would always enjoy going to this restaurant called Lambert's, and the waiters would throw rolls at people all the way from across the room instead of serving them, which was kind of interesting and fun at the same time. My sister Hannah and I were very blessed to know our grandparents so well, and even our great-grandparents, which is honestly rare, as you would imagine. Learning from them was really special to me, and I will miss Pops very much, and I know you all will too. And he was many things to many people, and Hannah and I are very thankful and proud to be able to call him our Pops as our grandfather.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Mike Clark, class of '84. I was known as Tater, and actually I was been known as Tater since first grade. But Mr. Hamlett always called me Tater, and because of his influence as a teacher. I've been a teacher now for right at 30 years, so I owe a lot to Mr. Hamlett and his love and his kindness toward me and my family. We will ask you to please stand as we sing this first song together, The Goodness of God. I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I know you as a father. I know you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God. Please be seated.
Second Corinthians 4:16 through the beginning of chapter 5. Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Since so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. I'm honored to speak today about my good friend, Conn Hamlett. And from time to time, I'll refer to him as Conn, sometimes Coach Hamlett, sometimes Mr. Hamlett. I don't think I use the term Durango 747. I don't think anyone in this audience will have a memory of Conn without smiling. We all have Mr. Hamlett stories. He certainly is one of the most unforgettable people I've known, and that you have probably known. Now, I want you to raise your hand if you had a nickname. Okay, this is Conn's funeral, so this will be very unconventional. And maybe it'll help me get through this. At the count of 3, shout out your name, your nickname. 1, 2, 3. Okay, Conn, you got that. They're here. We took attendance. Maybe that bit of unconventional funeral catharsis will allow me not to get too teary. But a bit of the unconventional is fitting for his funeral. So what do you remember about Mr. Hamlett? It might have been one of those zany, offhanded comments, his humorous way of seeing life's ironies. For example, a physically unfit person was a guy who would pull a muscle reaching for a triple word score while playing Scrabble. Or when I started losing my hair, he said he noticed that my part was getting wider. But most of all, it was the way he made you feel when you were around him. Maya Angelou once said that people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Now, contrary to what Maya Angelou may have said, many of you cannot forget something Mr. Hamlett said. And you cannot forget something Mr. Hamlett did. But each of you are here today because you were made to feel special by Conn Hamlett. It's my hope and desire to convey to the family and friends just how special we felt about Conn Hamlett, while sharing some remembrance of this most memorable man. 1 Corinthians 15, 53, and 55, I'll sort of paraphrase, but what it says is, "For what is mortal must be changed into what is immortal. Then the scripture will come true. Death is destroyed, and victory is complete." He was a Renaissance man. He loved to teach, and he was a really, really good teacher. Now, he was a legendary teacher. Many of you here today had Latin or history under Conn. But what you really had was a teacher who made dry subjects interesting. You recall Mr. Hamlett as your favorite teacher. He knew his subjects, but he also knew you. In the film Mr. Holland's Opus, a movie about an exceptional teacher, the principal tells Mr. Holland that a teacher has two jobs: to fill students with information and to give them a compass. Mr. Hamlett did both. He took it upon himself to know his students. He exemplified lifelong learning and curiosity. I can hear him say, "Well, don't you think?" Or, "Can you imagine?" He was a thinker and a man with a vivid imagination, encouraging others to do likewise. Now, I came to know Coach Hamlett 25 years ago through my daughter Meredith, who took his history class. We, along with many other parents, also entrusted the Hamletts as they took Meredith and her classmates on several trips to Europe. I was envious. Can you imagine Mr. Hamlett as your tour guide to Rome? He had a tremendous influence on so many students, both in and out of the classroom. But aside from teaching, being everyone's favorite, and a tour guide extraordinaire, both here in Nashville and abroad, Coach Hamlett was an excellent Bible student. His curiosity for learning knew no bounds. His thorough study of the prophets further cemented his own faith, and his findings would help others to strengthen their faith. He shared that with conviction and enthusiasm. I had the privilege of teaching a small discussion class right back there here at Madison. Conn and Barbara Fay were steady attendees. I could always count on Conn for something: an interesting anecdote, an explanation of a word, the derivation of a word, or some historical context. His eyebrows would raise, and he would ask if I minded if he made a brief comment. Now, I can tell you that every rabbit trail that he took us on was worth the journey. His presence and comments enriched the class. You know, if Conn had ever been a Jeopardy contestant, we would have never heard of Ken Jennings. My wife said, "People won't know who Ken Jennings is." But you knew. Conn was better than Google. He was a walking reference library, Connopedia. Speaking of tech, Google makes me think of a t-shirt that my wife bought for Conn while he was in the hospital. The message on the shirt said, "Moses was the first person with a tablet downloading data from the cloud." It was so appropriate because Conn had a high regard for the Ten Commandments and a low comprehension for all things techie. But I recall Conn saying in class, "Doesn't it all come down to obeying the Ten Commandments?" And the shirt was so appropriate, and he wore it a lot. Conn was always a source of encouragement. He would say to me, "I'm a Marty Rothschild fan." The fact is that it was a mutual admiration relationship. When Conn was your friend, you knew he was in your corner. Conn recommended me for the board at Good Pasture, where I've served alongside him and many other fine people. He loved the school. He represented the heart and the soul of the school on the board. He will be missed. It was always a board meeting highlight when we would go through the annual financials, the cash flow, the profit statement, the balance sheet, and Mr. Hamlett's eyes would glaze over. This was about as Greek to him as Latin would be for the rest of us. Then Conn would conclude, "I only have one question, doctor," and that would have been our finance chair, either Steve Gregory or later Jeff Forehand. "What's the health of the patient? Are we surviving on junk food, or are these financials showing us as thriving? Are we getting our vegetables?" He wanted an abbreviated summary in terms that he could understand, and he did it every time. There were so many facets to Conn, so as Conn would put it, to make a long story even longer, I'll continue. Now, apart from a well-cultivated mind, Conn also believed in the Latin phrase, and I have no idea how this is pronounced, but I figure Latin would be close to Italian, so I'll give it an Italian accent. Mens sana in corpore sane, a sound mind and a sound body. Yes, to the amazement of many, the Latin teacher, the world history teacher, and the Bible scholar was also a bodybuilder and a professional wrestler. And you find that unusual. The Green Marvel was Conn's wrestling character. He brought a level of sophistication to a sport that needed the intellect of Conn Hamlett. I imagined each round of his match was probably announced with Roman numerals. A sports aficionado, he put his encyclopedic knowledge on display for years on a sports call-in show at WLAC. Oh, and probably worth mentioning, as someone who didn't play golf, he managed to coach the golf team at Good Pasture, and they won 3 state championships. Along with the humor, much of it self-effacing, the curiosity, the scholarship, the athleticism. Upon his retirement from teaching, he now had time to give free rein to another of those facets, that vivid imagination. Off he'd go to Kennett, Missouri, his hometown, for inspiration. On the front porch of the hardware store, the plot would come to life, the good guys, the desperados. The result was a series of 7 Western novels following the exploits of our hero, John Lee Johnson, who I'm convinced was Conn's alter ego. He could spin a yarn his way. The words were vintage Conn Hamlett. His talents and interests were astounding, and the longer I knew him, the more layers were revealed. Even just a couple of weeks ago, while visiting Conn one day in the hospital, Martha and I, along with his son, as well as Erica, his daughter-in-law, and friends, Lynn and Susan Sherrill, were regaled with Barbara Fay's story of their courtship. We learned a lot of things about Conn. She said he was a really good kisser, and that he liked to kiss a lot. Maybe there's some other things that I probably shouldn't repeat. But it was fun. I fully expected Conn to raise up in that bed and say, now, Mother, we just need to go now. We need to go. His was a life well lived, and more than his obedience to the Ten Commandments was his recognition of the greatest one, found in Mark 12, 29 through 31. To love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And second, to love your neighbor as yourself. All who knew him knew that about him. He was a great kingdom man, a wonderful husband to Barbara Fay, a role model father to Byron and Roger, a great grandpa. Despite the pain of these last few months, his faith and belief in what comes next enabled him to face it all with courage and anticipation. On each of our hospital visits, we would pray together, and he would say, I want you to know, heaven is real. I want to read from one of the prophets, because that is what really strengthened Conn's faith. And this is a familiar one to so many of you, Isaiah chapter 40, verses 28 through 31. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. This is a message of faith spoken to those who are here today. Don't grow weary in well-doing. Hannah, Josh, Roger, Erica, Barbara Fay, you know that your loved one was genuine, the real deal, in his own unique way, one of a kind. The world, those who knew him, are better because of this solitary life. He will be missed, but not forgotten. A most loved, inspiring, and unforgettable man.
Mr. Billy Conn Hamlett, a life well lived and deeply cherished. You're right, Erica. Departed this world on January 28th, 2024, to the age of 81, born on July the 3rd, 1942, or 44, or 48, depending which Facebook post you looked at. Because we never, ever knew exactly how old he was. That was kind of an ongoing joke between he and Mr. Hayes. He was born in Hornersville, Missouri, or as he says, not really, that was where the doctor was from. To Troy and Eileen Hamlett. His legacy is carried forward by his devoted wife of 58 years, Barbara Fay, his Fay girl. And his loving sons, Byron and Roger, and precious daughter-in-law, Erica. He's survived by his precious grandchildren, Hannah and Joshua. And he was preceded in death by his parents. Eric would write, a man of many talents and passions, Conn's journey was marked by a commitment to education, sportsmanship, and rich tapestry of experience. He earned a Bachelor of Arts from Lipscomb University and a Master of Arts from Peabody, Vanderbilt, in Nashville. For 35 years, he imparted knowledge and wisdom at Good Pasture Christian School, where he taught Latin, Bible, AP History, AP European Government, Art, and English, and served on the board for the past 16 years. His coaching prowess led the golf team to 3 state championships, as Marty reminded us, even though he had never actually ever played the game. Beyond his professional endeavors, Conn's zest for life led him to explore various interests. He was a professional wrestler with the NWA, a competitive bodybuilder, author, familiar voice on the radio, and a personality and sports host on 1510 WLAC. His love for sharing stories and knowledge extended to serving as a local tour guide for Nashville and a global European tour guide. As we bid farewell to this remarkable man, the following individuals have been chosen to serve as his pallbearers. Testimony to their deep bond of friendship and camaraderie shared with Mr. Conn Hamlett, Mr. Lynn Sherrill, Mr. Michael Norris, Mr. Irving Chamberlain, Mr. Alonzo Chamberlain, Mr. Gene Chamberlain, Mr. Terry Chamberlain, Mr. Joshua Hamlett. These pallbearers, each a friend and family member, symbolize the strength of the connection that Conn forged throughout his life. The family has asked that in lieu of flowers, donations be made to friendship. Excuse me, y'all. I'm sorry I say it so much. To Good Pasture, even though we don't care. No. If you send it to us, we'll send it right back to Good Pasture, I promise you. But the scholarship that he established, or that his students established, so that students could continue to go to Good Pasture Christian School and to have that wonderful experience that so many of us in this room were able to enjoy. May his legacy inspire generations to come, and may his family find solace in the countless memories that they've shared with him. And may he rest in peace. That is his beautiful obituary. No one in this world was like Conn Hamlett. I think I saw on Gail Patson's page that she wrote he was 1 in a billion. And that's right, because 1 in a million just wasn't enough. And so as we start here to kind of walk through a few things about his life, especially from a student's perspective, I just want us to hear him one more time. And so I'm going to ask the gentleman in the back there, if you will, to go ahead, Todd, and play his introduction.
Before I get started, I want to tell you a little story. Once there was a small boy on the playgrounds of Northeast Arkansas. He had liquid brown eyes, and a frail little body. People pushed him around and shoved him around, and he was frightened and scared and anxious. One day, this small boy on the playgrounds of Northeast Arkansas with the liquid brown eyes raised his little small fist, gnarled fist, silhouetted against a stark and sullen sky. And he said, someday I'm going to build up my body and I'm going to increase my knowledge and I'm going to be something. Some of you are probably saying, Coach Hamlett, is that small little boy on the playgrounds of Arkansas with the liquid brown eyes and his fist gnarled up against a stark and sullen sky, is that small boy you? And the answer is no. Fact is, I was the one who pushed him around a lot. He was a weird little kid.
Faye, we know what you saw in him now. See, he didn't look like that when we knew him. He looked like this. Mr. Hamlett, Conn Hamlett, Coach Hamlett, Conn, BC. Billy Conn, nice guy. The Green Marvel, Fat Boy, Greasy, and Pops. Many names that people refer to him. The writer of the book of Hebrews in the 12th chapter, after he's talked about all these incredible Hall of Fame people, he says these words, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance, endurance, the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith." I don't know of a better description of who he was to us than that. He went through struggles. His life was not easy, and he went through different moments of life that he had to work harder. He talked about his time during school. He was not a strong student, even though he says he was born of average looks, and average mind, and average body. But he didn't do very well in school because he had other interests. He had other things going on. And he talked about at graduation and his mother being there, and all the other kids that were honor students had the gold tassels and the gold cords. And he said he had this little dinky blue. And he said his mama cried. And he said he made a decision right there to change. And he did. He did. That was his first epiphany. And from that point on, he went to Freed-Hardeman, and then to Harding, and then to Lipscomb, and then to Vanderbilt. And all the time he continued to get better. He then joined the service, and he served his country. And you know one of those wonderful stories that he would often tell to us over and over again about the time he was looking to go to a church. And a fellow tells him, that, where it is. He has a little piece of paper. He's trying to find the church. And he says something about being Church of Christ. And the guy said, "Oh, you're Church of Christ?" And he said, "Well, yeah." And he kind of gets excited, and he thinks the guy's going to have a connection with him. And he said, "Well, you're going to hell." He said, "Oh." He said, "I immediately ran over there," and he said, "I jumped up and said, I started shaking his hand." He said, "It's nice to meet you, God. I just thought you'd be taller." We love to hear his stories about his wrestling days. And we were so enamored by the things that he would tell us and how cool that was. When he was Billy Conn, nice guy, but especially when he was the Green Marvel. And he would kiss his arms as he walked around the ring, and they would scream and throw stuff at him. And he would see a bald man, and he'd say, "Hey, Pops, how many channels do you get on your head?" And they would boo. But they also told the story about coming home and you sitting there with Byron and Roger on each knee, and he was telling you about an opportunity that he had to go and to make $50,000 for a while if he went to Japan and wrestle. And he tells that tears rolled down your face. And I love when I see it on the video, he just says, it was done. Thank you. Thank you for not letting him go. Because all of us here have benefited because of that. We have been blessed because he was our teacher. If you're able, if he was your teacher, you were one of his students, would you just stand? Look around this room. Thank y'all. He connected with us like no other teacher I ever had in my life. I'm in education today because of him. There's no doubt about it. And when I teach my class every quarter, I try to think about him. I try to channel him in so many ways. To be funny. To try to connect with kids in the ways that he connected with us. Marty already mentioned the idea of the nicknames and had each of you shout those out. I went through some of the ones on Facebook, and I just wrote a few of them down. Adolf and Amish Chris and Baby Mavis and Bookworm and Catfish and the Countess von Popoff. Dr. Insano, Effervescent Tracy, sweet Tracy. El Magnifico, Frack and Frickin' Frack, Goddess in Training, Joan Jett, King Sievers, King Wall, Little Hopester, Little Ralphie, Mary Poppins, Rockin' Ralph, Rockin' Wade, Spider, the Count, the Emperor, the littlest wall of all, the magnificent one, the Sewing Circle, the Sisters of Song, and the list goes on and on and on. And he remembered every single one of them. And when people would come back together, he would call you by your nickname or your given name because I don't believe he ever forgot anyone. Why did he give people nicknames? Because he said he wanted to make students feel noticed and special. And he did just that. Aside from being brilliant, his greatest gift to connect with his students was his humor and his wit. Little Hopester, in her post, wrote this story, and I just want to share a little bit of it. Hope said, I remember the first time that I walked down that dark, seemingly abandoned hallway as a freshman towards his classroom that was accurately labeled the dungeon. In the back left corner there that we all knew so well, I remembered hesitating before I walked through the door of his dimly lit room for the honors world history, wondering if this man was going to eat me alive, and his sharp tongue, quick wit, and huge learning expectations I had heard about from the upperclassmen. He called roll and looked at me and said, Altieri. Altieri. Another red-headed Altieri girl. What is the man to do? He had my older sister the year before. Then he stared at me with that wrinkled look on his face and one of those facial expressions he was famous for, and he said, Hope. So is your middle name full or less? To which she replied, and she said, I don't know what came over me. She said, well, I guess that depends on the day. Is your middle name Vict or Artist? Knowing that his name was Conn, he got a scowl on his face, and boy, I knew I was in for it. I was going to have to go to see Mr. McCarley on my first 10 minutes in class. It was not starting out on the right foot. As I waited for my punishment, much to my surprise, he began to chuckle. He pointed at me and he said, You got moxie. And I like that in a person. And he continued calling roll. There were some special phrases that he would use, like exactilioso, my friend, when someone said something right. He would say in my group, he'd say, someone go down the hall and tell Miss Burkett to shoot the juice. Let's make it bird's eye in here. I can't go past the frozen food section and see bird's eye that I don't think of him. Someone prop open that back door and let all this BO and gas and halitosis out of here. El photo the moto, put your paper at the top and pass them to the aisle. And I heard this one more than any other. Hoss, if you don't shut that mouth, I'm going to come over and jack that jaw for you. For our class of 82, Mr. Hargrove did not build our float. He was simply a supervisor. Dave, leave the hole, he would say in the voice of Simon Barsinister. Or Ken, bring out the tickle machine. He would say things like, a man who wears a meatloaf tie will never go hungry. Someone would always sneak into class and write fat and bald on the board, big letters. He would come in, he would look at it, and he goes, you kids are so silly, you can't even spell. And he would erase the T, and he would put a B up there, and he would change it to fab and bold every single time. He connected with us at our level. He was a brilliant teacher, and he used games to help us learn and retain that knowledge. I can still remember the kings of Judah from the time of the prophets in chronological order, 45 years later. Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amon, Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, Zedekiah, the governor there at the end. Why do I remember that? Because the way that he taught us over and over and over again, we learned and we drilled and we had games and we tested over and over again. But man, we loved it. We loved it so much. Mr. Hamlett, the greatest gift to his students, however, was his relationship with Jesus and his desire for us to have that same relationship with him too. One morning, he and I would sneak out of school to go eat breakfast. I was not a student. This was after. They said I'd come back later on. He would have a planning period, and we would sneak over to the Waffle House. And for breakfast, he would always eat chili with extra onions. But we'd talk about life, liberty, and the purchase of happiness. And then we would get into deeper spiritual conversations. And I can remember one time, very specifically, I was looking at a passage that I really couldn't understand. And it was found in the 8th chapter of the book of Mark. Mark's the only gospel writer that even includes this story. It's about the healing of the man from Bethsaida. In the 22nd verse of that chapter, it said, they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand, and he led him outside the village. And when he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, do you see anything? And the man replied, I see people, and they look like trees walking around. Now, if I take my glasses off, I can get a little bit of glimpse of what that man may have been seeing. It's so odd for us because we've never known Jesus to not fully heal someone. He didn't heal someone who was lame and they had to walk on crutches. He didn't walk on water up to his waist. When he healed someone from the dead, they weren't in a coma. And so this was so odd. They would have this experience that he would touch this man to heal him like he had done many other blind people. And yet to us, it looks like it doesn't work. But listen what he says. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. We talked about it for a while. I didn't understand it. Why is this? Was the power not in him that day? Could he not do it? He said, I think you have to look on either side of it. And we started looking on the before part of that, and it's the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. It's the story about him talking about the leaven of the Pharisees. He asked them how many loaves they had. Every time he's feeding people, and he's reminding them over and over and over again. And he gets ready to go to this other side, and they're still confused about it because they only brought one loaf of bread. And he sees that they're arguing about it. And he said, do you still not get it? He said, when I fed the 5,000, he said, how many loaves were left over? And they said, 12 baskets. When I fed the 4,000, how many baskets did you pick up? And he said, the 7. He said, do you still not get it? Do you still not understand? You're worried about something that's not there. And then this story that Mark tells. And then the verse after this, it says, Jesus and his disciples went to the villages around Caesarea Philippi, and on the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Peter said, "You're the Messiah." So from not understanding it, not getting it, being a student who wasn't fully understanding what Jesus was trying to do, to the story of the man that he touched more than once so that he might see clearer, to the proclamation of Peter that he was the Messiah. I don't know about you, but I sure have needed a second touch in my life. A third and a fourth. Paul would say that we are Christ's ambassadors, his representatives, that we are actually being him for people on this earth. I want you to know that for me and for seemingly every post that I've read on Facebook, Conn Hamlett was the second touch of Jesus to our lives. I walked out of his room seeing more clearly. I walked out of their home seeing more clearly. I was invited in to be a part of their family in so many ways. I was blessed to make the pilgrimage to Kennett, Missouri. I got to go to SEMO Produce and meet Bud Henderson. Participate in the pitch game. Listen, there's nothing this side of heaven, especially for Conn in Kennett, Missouri. Isn't that right, boys? It was his place. It was his terra on this earth. I don't know if Mr. Hamlett was a fan of Broadway, but there's a show called Wicked. And there was a song written by Stephen Schwartz called For Good that the two main characters sing. And I just want to read a portion of that as I wrap this up. I've heard it said that people come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn, and we are led to those who help us most to grow if we let them. And we help them in return. Well, I don't know if I believe that's true, but I know I'm who I am today because I knew you. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I have been changed for good. It well may be that we will never meet again in this lifetime. So let me say before we part, so much of me is made of what I learned from you. You'll be with me like a handprint on my heart. And now, whatever way our story ends, I know you have rewritten mine by being my friend. Like a ship blown from its mooring by the sea off to the sea, like a seed dropped by a skybird in a distant wood. Who can say if I had been changed for the better? But because I knew you, because we knew you, we have been changed for good. God is real. I will live again. I'm not afraid to die. It is just my time to go. 81 years is a wonderful life and legacy to leave. Paul again would tell us to use these words when we think about that day when Jesus returned. And now, dear brothers and sisters, we want you to know that we happen to be believers who have died, excuse me, let me start over. We want you to know what will happen to the believers who have died, so you will not grieve like people who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and was raised to life again, we also believe that when Jesus returns, God will bring back with him the believers who have died. We tell you this directly from the Lord. We who are still living when the Lord returns will not meet him ahead of those who have died. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a commanding shout, and the voice of the archangel and the trumpet of God call. First believers who have died will be raised from their graves. Then together with them, we who are still alive and remain on the earth will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Then we will be with the Lord forever. So encourage one another with these words. Until we meet again.
We'll be singing together Because He Lives, and we'll ask you to please stand. God sent His Son, they called Him Jesus. He came to love, heal, and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives, all fear is gone. Because I know He holds the future, and life is worth the living just because He lives. And then one day I'll cross the river, I'll find life's life, no war with pain. And then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the light of glory, and I know He reigns. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives, all fear is gone. Because I know He holds the future, and life is worth the living just because He lives. And life is worth the living just because He lives.
Pithy. Pithy means to be brief, forceful, and meaningful in expression. One of the hundreds of rare but purposeful words I learned from Mr. Hamlett and still use today. So as I close this service and lead us in a prayer in a few minutes, knowing that we could go on for many, many hours, I hope to leave you with just a few pithy words and a desire to convey as best I can just how much this scholar of scholars and gentleman of gentlemen meant to me. There's an old saying that says a tree is best measured when it's laid down. And as we think about laying this great man down and our measurement of someone so grand, I find it striking that the world's tallest tree, redwood sequoia in California, is nicknamed Hyperion. Some of you may remember from Mr. Hamlett's Latin class, Hyperion was the Greek Titan, the brother of Kronos and Rhea and the father of Helios. Those names that today convey power and strength, much like that tallest of trees and so much like the name Billy Conn Hamlett. The man I referred to is the Great One, and Fat Boy sometimes. For a lot of you in this room, like me and like Marty showed us, a nickname was conferred upon us that meant something, sometimes serious, sometimes not so serious. For my generation, it was Snow White, Stacey Myers 2, the goddess. There was New Boy, Baby Kennedy, and Adolf. At least I'm sure you know, I think he gave the silliest name to the student he probably adored the most. The truth is, though, he didn't need a nickname to remember anyone by. As John said, his intellect, he could have memorized everyone's first, middle, and last name if he wanted to. And you didn't need a nickname to be special. He didn't care how well or if you played sports or an instrument, how much you could bench press, how nice your shoes were, or if you were a Scrabble or Axis and Allies champion. He really didn't care how many Greek or Roman gods and goddesses you could memorize. I do think he cared, though, that if you knew the difference between cavalry and Calvary. You see, rather than become one of the greatest college professors, nationally famous author, sports personality, world-renowned theologian, all he could have easily achieved, Mr. Hamlett chose a different kind of greatness. In the book Good to Great, author Jim Collins says that greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. And so in that same day, Mr. Hamlett lived out his life by making a conscious choice to make a difference in the lives of others and to live a life of incredible discipline across a wide spectrum of endeavors, especially, as we've heard and know, of studying Scripture. 2 Timothy 2:15 seems so apropos to describe him. It says, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth." What he taught all of his students was so much more than academia. He taught us to laugh and to love and to draw within the God-given gifts we each have to do more than we can do on our own. He did it with such enthusiasm, which isn't surprising when you learn that the word enthusiasm comes from the Greek words in theos, in God. Adapting a quote that I love, Mr. Hamlett's gifts were not about him. Leadership was not about him. His purpose was not about him. He understood more than most that a life of significance is about serving those who needed his gifts, his leadership, his talent, his purpose. That is his legacy to us. In what became the last public speaking he did here at Madison last July, he led our time of communion, the Lord's Supper, and he actually talked about funerals and noted how agnostics and humanists, they view funerals in such simple terms, but not in the true nature of death. And that prompted Conn to read Psalm 147, which says that God determines the number of stars and he gives to all their names. You know that astronomers estimate that there are 200 billion trillion stars. And God knows the name of every one of them. And the connection that Conn wanted to make is that you and I, we're the crowning glory of God's creation. And he knows our name. Whether it's Lester, Chester, Hubert, Agnes, Euladine, or Mavis, he knows you. Mr. Hamlett, a man who was funny yet sincere with names and monikers, he wanted more than anything, as John said, that each and every one of us to know the only name that matters in our lives is the one by which Jesus calls us. He would want you to know more than that. As Isaiah 43:1 says, not only does God know your name, he has claimed you as his own. And he loves you so much. Of course, he loves us so much to give us his son. I'll share one final memory and story. Back in high school, I was also privileged to make the pilgrimage to Kennett. I went with Lisa and genius Matt Moore and baby Kennedy Gall, and we traveled to his hometown, and we got to play cards and eat a home-cooked meal while his mom prepared, and we canoed down the raging current river. For the record, he sat in the back, which I thought he was going to steer, and I sat in the front, and with only about 5 minutes in, I turn around, and he's got his red hat, Alabama hat, down over his eyes. He's got his arms stretched back, and he's asleep in his undersized Alabama tank top. So we get out about 30 minutes later, and I'm tugging the canoe out, and he gets up, "Whew, Greg Stress, that was a workout, wasn't it, brother?" But the most memorable moment for me on that trip, as it was for others, I saw on Stacy and Lisa's post about the place below the railroad trellis that he took us to show us where God lives. I can still see it vividly today in my mind, although it's an inconspicuous spot in the forest that no one else would ever identify. And I can't begin to explain how and why Mr. Hamlett came to believe that that spot was the place where the creator of the universe himself hangs out. But if he believed it, then it was good enough for me. And I believed in Mr. Hamlett and everything he taught me and encouraged me to strive to be, because he believed in me. He believed in all of his students to be the best they could be for the glory of God. It was there then and now that I have realized and want you all to know that he had the knowledge of Scripture like none of us ever will, I don't think. The minor prophets, Ezekiel, Daniel, Acts, Revelation, it meant nothing without the deep relationship that he had with Jesus. And so I'm comforted in this tough moment by the thought that my dear friend, my brother, my mentor, my hero now gets to hang out with God in that spot below the train tracks. Probably talking it up together about Latin conjugation, SE sports, or probably arguing over who won their first wrestling match. So I want to lead us into our time of prayer now. And as we end this service, I want to start it by reading Philippians 4, 8, and 9 to reflect on. It's a farewell passage by Paul to the Christians in Philippi that I believe our beloved Billy Conn Hamlett would want to leave us with and to know and to live by more than all of his teachings combined. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. My prayer is over. The family has asked that all remain seated. And in a moment of reverent silence, the casket will be taken out of the room, and then you'll be dismissed. Please pray with me. God of all comfort, in the silence of this moment, this hour, we ask that you sustain this beautiful family in the days and weeks and months, years to come, in the loss of this incredible man that you gifted to this world. Especially be with Barbara Fay, Byron, Roger, Erica, Hannah, and Josh. Comfort all of these loved ones here. Deliver us, God, from any loneliness, despair, and doubt, for our hearts are in pain, but we believe that you will fill our hearts with peace. And so, God, I just pray that this be a moment of rededication to you in our lives. Those of us who are left behind, God, we have the solemn responsibility of life. So help us to choose to live life in a manner that would put a smile on Conn's face. He was such an amazing teacher, but thankfully, God, he pointed us to the greatest teacher of all, your son, Jesus. So may we leave this place and live in accordance with your will, in obedience to your teaching and for your glory, so that we may be prepared to meet you one day and to see our dear friend, father, grandfather, husband, and hero Billy Conn Hamlett again. So we offer our prayer in the name of him who is the resurrection and the life, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Let's everyone please stand.